I'm going to kick things off. So good afternoon and welcome to Masterclass series number 8, cybersecurity in smart places. My name is Rory Brown and I'm the Director of Smart Places Programs in the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. Today I'm speaking to you from the land of the Camaragal people of the Gungai tribe of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we are all virtually meeting today. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present and emerging, and also extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians joining us today. So welcome everybody. This slightly smaller list today, but therefore a better opportunity for everyone to get involved and answer questions. Before we get into it, just a few little housekeeping points for you. I see that everyone's doing this really well off straight away, but going to ask us to all remain on mute. If you've got questions, do please post those into the chat and we'll pick them up. If you didn't see the little banner saying that this event is being recorded, I'll just remind you it is being recorded, and we'll let you know where to access at the conclusion of this session. All right, now, last week my colleague Luke Musgrave, when he was facilitating the Masterclass in Public Spaces, suggested that that was going to be the best of all. I'm going to strongly disagree with that, because today I'm joined by two leaders in the cybersecurity space. We are very privileged to have Charlotte Wood, who's the Acting Executive Director of ID Support of the Department of Customer Services, and Alana Marashat, who is the Professor of Cybersecurity and Behaviour at Western Sydney University. We're going to be discussing cybersecurity considerations for smart places. And my one thing I'm going to add in here is this is foundational stuff. In some respects, if we don't get this right, there can't be smart places. This is why I think this is one of the most critical, important masterclasses that we're going to be having. So hopefully you've had a chance to do the Menti poll. We had some few questions, so I'm quite keen to see what that looks like before we get into our presentations today. And so Mark has a chance to throw up the results. All right. Was a small sample. Our first question was, does your organization have a cyber incident response plan? And I was hoping actually that at least we would have 100% on this, but it's interesting that there are a couple of no's. So I think that's already showing some of the gaps. Now, what about the next question? If your organization does have a cyber incident response plan, have you read it? No, quite impressed. 50% of that answer did. A couple of no's there. Again, I don't think that's a surprise, but I'll look forward to hearing what Charlotte and Alana have to say about the importance of these things. And have we received any cyber incident response training from your organization? Again, a number of no's there. I think that's showing a bit of the maturity of where we are from a cybersecurity perspective. So look, I appreciate you taking the time to fill in the poll. I think, Mark, let's keep it open for those that are still joining. The poll will be there. Details of the Menti code in the chat. If you haven't had a chance to answer, please do go and answer. We'll come back to these towards the end of today. So we've got about an hour and 45 minutes. Now I'm really pleased to invite Charlotte Wood to talk to us about applying existing cybersecurity principles to new smart cities. For those of you who don't know, Charlotte is currently, as I said, currently acting ED of ID Support for the Department of Customer Services, New South Wales. She's responsible for delivering programs that aim to increase cybersecurity preparedness, prevent incidents from happening, reduce their impact and spread when they do occur, as well as uplifting cybersecurity culture across New South Wales government. Charlotte's also the proud recipient of a 2020 Churchill Fellowship to conduct research in cybersecurity awareness internationally, and a recipient of a scholarship from the Cyber Leadership Institute to undertake their cyber leadership program Again, so we're very privileged to have Charlotte with us today and to bring her expertise onto this topic. With that, Charlotte, the floor is yours, and thank you.
Thanks, Rory, and I'll just bring up my presentation. And while I'm doing that, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. That's where I'm coming from today, and they're the traditional custodians of the land I'm on today, and pay my respects to their elders, both past, present, and emerging. So thank you very much for the introduction, Rory. My job titles are a bit confusing, but usually I'm working for Cybersecurity New South Wales, which is the whole of government function, looking at uplifting cybersecurity across whole of New South Wales government. I'm looking at the chat. I'm familiar with a couple of you. So it's great to see you and nice to virtually meet the rest of you today. Now, can someone just advise me whether you can see my slides before I get going?
We can, Charlotte.
Right,
well, that's I can.
Perfect. All right. Shout out anybody if you can't. So today I'm talking about cybersecurity in smart places, particularly the policy settings more broadly for cybersecurity, particularly in New South Wales government. Now, I acknowledge many of you aren't from New South Wales government, but some of the things I talk about in regards to policy settings, they're all available publicly. So you can have a look at those and familiarise yourself with those as well. I'll also be talking about some new principles that came out of the United Kingdom's National Cybersecurity Centre. They tend to produce really, really palatable materials on cybersecurity, really clear and really easy to put in place. So I'll be talking through those newly released principles and some of the things in there that stood out to me, both things that reiterate what we're doing in New South Wales, but also some interesting ways of expressing how to undertake cybersecurity in smart places in a way, in some instances, that I haven't thought of before. So firstly, the policy settings in New South Wales government. We have a New South Wales cybersecurity policy. If you've ever heard me speak before, I talk about it a lot. It's essentially the mandatory requirements for cybersecurity within New South Wales government. It applies across the board of all agencies and departments in New South Wales, small, big, whatever type of digital systems and services they're running. So the policy is designed to enable the effective use of new technologies and protect systems and their information in a world of ever-evolving cyber risks. The policy itself is structured very similar to what's called the NIST cyber framework. If you haven't heard of that before, it's a cycle that breaks things up into 5 stages. We use a modified version of that in the New South Wales Government cybersecurity policy. So the headings that we use are prepare, prevent, detect, respond, and recover. My work spends a lot of the time in the prepare, prevent, and then right at the end, the recovery phase. My current role is very focused on recovery following data breaches as well. So the controls in the cybersecurity policy, they're a combination of technical, people, and process controls. So they're not focused on just the technical controls related to cybersecurity, very much focused as well on the people and process controls. Now I'll show you in a bit aspects of that policy in a clearer way, but for now that's the first policy I wanted to introduce you to. There's 2 other policies in New South Wales government that are specifically relevant to cybersecurity and smart places. So within the smart infrastructure policy, there's actually very specific sections on security with some really clear instructions about applying security in smart places. The other relevant policy is the New South Wales government's Internet of Things policy. Again, it reinforces that the New South Wales cybersecurity policy is what it needs to be referred to in terms of controls for cybersecurity when using Internet of Things, but also provides some specific advice in terms of securing those Internet of Things devices. Now, all those policies work together, and we also have some other principles in New South Wales government, but this is for anyone designing something for New South Wales government as well. So these are our secure by design principles. So the secure by design principles, there's objectives overall of the design principles, but there's specific sections for security and privacy. It emphasises the policy again, but again, really specific items on how to ensure security in projects from the start and on an ongoing basis. So those are the main policies within New South Wales Government and the settings we work within. You'll see that there are 4 complementary policies and principles, and bringing them all together really does cover a lot of the work that can be done within smart places to secure devices and infrastructure. I guess the thing I'd say on that, and one of the things I want to talk about today, is that good cybersecurity policy and good cybersecurity design and controls can be applied across the board, whatever the type of system and service you're delivering. So there's specifics about how the technical aspects should be configured and some different ideas that I'll talk about with the principles, but good cybersecurity frameworks apply whatever you're applying it to. There'll be specifics that need to be ironed out, but the principles are the same. Now, in the media, smart cities and cybersecurity is getting a bit of attention. People think they're a very good target. The attacks on Atlanta and Baltimore that you may be familiar with, Baltimore, a smart city, they actually disrupted the operations of those cities quite a bit. Also, many cybersecurity researchers are coming out and saying that many smart cities will be targeted. Also, always general cyber attacks in the media. The Channel 9 ones are good to bring up. Media's getting attacked and reporting on themselves being attacked. And then also another smart city project there that faced a ransomware attack as well. But very recently in the media, there was the release of these principles that I'm going to be talking to you about today. So these were released by the National Cybersecurity Centre, as I said, and they're not a framework as such. They're really key principles to anybody that is working in the smart city sphere. Now, when they announced these principles, I really liked aspects of the media release because they talked about how one of the first ever Hollywood depictions of a cyber attack was actually against a smart city or smart city infrastructure. So it wasn't a teenager taking control of some nuclear system or a magic box that can decrypt anything that a Bond villain has or wants. It was an attack against a city's centralised traffic management system, and it was in the film The Italian Job, the 1969 version, as part of an elaborate heist. A dodgy computer professor switches magnetic storage tapes for the Turin traffic control to create a gridlock. Chaos ensues, they blow the bloody doors off, and the thieves escape with the gold. That's why I love the NCSC, because they include things like that in the media release. So 3 weeks ago, this is hot off the press. The principles, you probably haven't read them yet. Many people in cybersecurity probably haven't read them yet, but they're a really useful resource. What I find interesting about these principles as well is some of the definitions there. So digital systems, we all know what those are. They're defined in every single cybersecurity policy you look at, but they talk about the cyber physical system. Now, I'd often think of this as operational technology. That's how we usually refer to it in my team, but they describe the cyber physical system, a system that measures or controls the physical world to achieve a particular goal, like a smart traffic control system. So that definition is really interesting, and I like that operational technology, cyber physical system makes so much more sense to me. Now, I'm not going to do a Menti poll because I'm lazy. I'm instead going to encourage you all to post in the chat. So crown jewels. We describe crown jewels within New South Wales as an agency's most valuable or operationally vital systems or information. It would be great, and I'd encourage you to post in the chat now, in terms of a smart city, what would the crown jewels be? What do you think would be the most operationally vital system or valuable system within a smart city? So I know there's not too many of us, but I'd encourage you to post in the chat some ideas about what you think a crown jewel would be in a smart city. I'll have a sip of coffee while you're typing. Yep, marina access to water. That's really vital, isn't it? Smart waterways. Ingrid's got the same one. Hi, Ingrid. Hope you're going well. You must be sick of hearing me speak. Yeah, Rory, utilities, absolutely. Utilities, water, electricity. Yeah. Every service connected to critical infrastructure, electricity, water, sewage, banks, hospital, transport, but everyone also that provides a service to these people. Good point, Alana. Yep, power, wastewater management, traffic control, traffic, communication lines. Yep, financial services need the money. Great. All right, well, this is what they include in the connected places principles. Traffic light management, CCTV, you'd expect that in a UK policy, waste management, street light management, parking management, transport services, public services. I think we covered that whole lot in our list there and more because we included financial services as well. That's what they have in there as examples of Crown Places in the connected places policy. Now, the way the principles work and the way they're structured is it defines ensuring cybersecurity protection for smart places into 3 categories. And I mentioned those NIST categories before. And in a way, they're a little bit similar within these principles, but I'm really liking them because they're much more palatable. I don't like the word preparedness. Prevention, you can only prevent so much. But they define it as understanding, designing, and managing. So essentially getting understanding of what's happening and what the structure is, how you're going to operate, managing, designing, getting everything in place, and then managing the ongoing management of the cybersecurity of the smart city. So understanding relates to understanding potential impacts, their risks, understanding the governance and skill structure that you need, understanding the supplier's role, and legal and regulatory requirements. Now, I'm not going to go into every single principle that's included in the UK's Connected Places principles, but I will highlight some of the ones I find really interesting or that resonate with what we're doing in New South Wales. So potential impacts. This is kind of like in the NIST framework, it's the identify section of the NIST framework, understanding your space. So who has overall responsibility and accountability for your connected place? What dependencies are there on other systems or suppliers? Who is dependent on you, on the connected place? What obligations do you have to the surrounding area? What will your sensor and IoT network look like? Where will your sensors and IoT devices be placed? What data will be collected, processed, stored, and shared? Again, that's not very specific to smart places. That's relevant to any business, organisation, or government department. What staff, expertise, infrastructure, and facilities are needed? And how does your operational security work overall? Now, risks. And I said before that I'd bring up some aspects of our cybersecurity policy in New South Wales and how they relate to the principles that have come out of the UK. The risk section absolutely relates to it. It's, conducting those cybersecurity threat assessments when performing risk assessments, knowing your data, connections, and architecture. But it's also about putting the accountability on the risk owners. So the risk owners of the connected place should work out what is most important to the operability of their services, understand and make some assumptions about the threats they may face. You have to make some assumptions best, particularly at the early stage when you haven't been attacked yet. You need to make some assumptions about what the threats will be. Identify the vulnerabilities and threats that could be exploited and use analysis to create a list of risks that you can prioritize according to how concerning they are. The next step in the understanding stage is governance and skills. Now, a lot of this resonated with our New South Wales government cybersecurity policy, and there are actually some more that I haven't got up there, but I've circled some of the controls we have in New South Wales government that align with this particular section of the connected place principles. But what was really interesting, that was a bit different to some of the things I've heard when people talk in general terms about cybersecurity. You often hear people talk about people having the technical understanding of cybersecurity in making decisions, but then you also hear people talk about cybersecurity not being a technical issue. It's a business risk, and it's about having that business understanding. This principles really specifically say, right, security knowledge, business knowledge, and technical knowledge. So they're being specific about that you need 3 different types of expertise on those governance groups to make those decisions. Not business risk and technical risk, it's security, business, and technical experts making decisions together. Also, it really calls out staff training. Now, I'm not talking about awareness training. I'm talking about staff training as in the people in control of privileged access, the people in controls of specialised systems within IT, and the cybersecurity people. It really emphasises them having the appropriate training to run those systems. Also, which is what's really interesting in the principles, is the emphasis on engaging citizens. Now, if you work in the private sector, you think, oh, yeah, well, we engage customers, we deliver what they need and we ensure they're protected and we work towards making sure they're more protected. And same with government, citizens are our customers, that we want to make sure they're protected. It's all about delivering trusted services for them. But the principles really talk about engaging the community because they're part of that smart city. So they say that building trust and being transparent with your citizens is needed to maximise engagement with your connected place. But it also needs to help them understand why there's a connected place, the role they have within it, and what data the connected place requires to function, whilst being transparent in providing assurance as to what data is being collected and how you intend to use, store, and protect any data. And they say this will help in building trust by clearly educating citizens, which will help encourage overall participation in the connected place. So again, that's really, really specific about bringing them along for the ride, but it's also about helping them to understand how their data is going to be used. So they want to fully participate in the process. Supplier's role. Supply chain risk is one of my favourite topics in cybersecurity. We do a lot of work on this in New South Wales government. But what's very prescriptive in these connected place principles is ensuring that you protect against foreign influence. So this is UK's identified as a risk to their connected places that those undertaking espionage might try and influence a smart city by different nefarious ways other than just getting into systems. So we're talking here about ownership, board representation, workforce, data hosting and routing, supplier relationship, provision of corporate services, knowledge or finance by corporate groups, and investors. And there was lots of work that came out about foreign influence last year, some reports in regards to that. This is though the first publicly available principle I've seen that's really specific about what to watch out for. Now, legal and regulatory requirements. That's the other thing that they have in these principles in terms of understanding the space. Now, I'll put you guys in a bit of a challenge here. In terms of Australia and cybersecurity, what do you think would be the legal and regulatory requirements we put in a principles document like this for connected places? It's a bit of a tricky one. I'll have another sip of coffee while you're posting in the chat. What do you think would be the legal and regulatory requirements in Australia for cybersecurity when rolling out a connected place? Interesting responses so far. State Records Act. Yep. Any other thoughts? Yep. Let's one more minute to see if anybody else is typing anything. I'm smiling, but not because it's a trick question or anything like that. It is a challenging question. Yep, finance APRA. No. So what's interesting about these principles, and I think it's really directly applicable to Australia as well. Obviously, I'm not going to include on the slide here the UK legislation because it's not particularly relevant to us. Well, actually, it kind of is. But the only legal requirements that they actually refer to in this document is their version of the Commonwealth Privacy Act under the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, so their version of that. And the other one that they refer to is GDPR, which is the European Data Breach legislation, privacy legislation. So not much at all. And, I was thinking about if I'm writing this for Australia, what would I include? And it's a very similar thing. So the requirements under the Commonwealth privacy legislation in New South Wales, we're subject to the PIPA Act, Privacy Act for New South Wales. If you're in a different state and territory, there's different privacy acts. So they're the two I would include as well. The regulatory requirements they specify, pretty minimal, and for us, we constantly say New South Wales government cybersecurity policy for anything that's an interaction with government or anybody that's contracted by government, but really light on. Now, Marina, I did not know about the cyber law map recently launched through ASLE, so I need to have a look at that, but I'm wondering to what extent that would have provisions for smart cities, something for people to look at. Yay, it's new. You should be on the masterclass, Marina, talking about that. That would be great if you could find a link. We'll be the most armed group with the new information with the cyber law map and these principles out of the UK. Yeah, it's really light on, and that's not a bad thing, but it's just something to remember that it's really those information laws and those privacy laws that you need to keep in mind in regards to smart cities. All right, designing, that's understanding. Yeah, cool. Marina, that's good. It's interesting. There mustn't be a UK equivalent either because they don't mention anything like that. So it'll be interesting to have a look at that link. Designing. So they talk about designing architecture, reducing exposure, protecting data, monitoring, reliance, and scalability. That's what's included in the designing section. So I mentioned secure by design principles earlier. That touches on some of this. The security sections of the smart infrastructure policy also do. But some interesting parts from those first three, I'm not going to go into them, but it specifically refers to quantum computing. So the UK is really thinking of, don't think about now, think about the next few years. What's going to happen over the horizon with things like quantum computing? Because some of our cybersecurity controls, particularly some of our technical controls that we have in place, they're going to be pretty difficult to combat quantum computing. And also they specifically mention in regards to data, there's all the usual stuff about protecting data, where's it stored, all of that, but they really specifically mention data at rest, but also how is your data protected in transit? And are you able to demonstrate how it is protected in transit? Because people often think about protecting data where it's stored, but how is it protected in transit? So they're really forward-thinking ideas in terms of planning and designing. Now, resilient and scalable. They've embraced the idea that your smart city is going to start as one thing and it's going to grow and grow and grow over years. So thinking about the future. And I think, we always think with technology, what's going to have the next thing? Got to build cybersecurity practices that are going to protect in the future. But then there's always the concept of it's constantly evolving. There's new threats. This really calls out that those working in cybersecurity and connected places need to be resilient and scalable. So that the design needs to scale up for the service and it needs to be thought about the design stage. That the connected place is demonstrably resilient in the face of increased demand. And I like the last sentence in particular. When limits are reached, the system should degrade gracefully rather than fail catastrophically. So that idea of building something that is going to become so much bigger, it's not just about the design, the products, the services, delivery. Same with cybersecurity. I find that really exciting. Monitoring. Again, this is pretty standard and very aligned with every other framework I've seen in terms of for monitoring. I don't have too much to add on that one. Now, managing is the third stage. So they're talking about managing privileges. They're talking about managing the supply chain. They're talking about managing the life cycle and incidents, response and recovery. Now with privileges, it's pretty standard. I didn't see anything in the document that was different to managing privileges more broadly in any cybersecurity settings that I've seen. So supply chain. We have contract provisions and as part of our policy, as you can see here, in terms of ensuring that the supply chain have cybersecurity controls. What's interesting in here is the right to audit, which is something that we've also been pushing for in our new contracts. The right to audit into all contracts and then also specifically exercising it, specifically using it, not just doing it when something goes wrong. And the usual, you have mechanisms in check and the protections that your supplier meets the level of security required for your connected place. Life cycle, and again, this is one that stands out because it's really that future planning, like that mention of quantum computing, like that mention of being able to scale up and be resilient. They mentioned the life cycle. So it's not just about building, it's how are things decommissioned. So when you're putting in that new technology, how to ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability when systems are being decommissioned. How components can be securely disposed of so as not to expose any sensitive data, and ensuring that there are clear responsibilities, processes and procedures in place throughout the connected place lifecycle to assist with that. And the last one I'm going to talk about, and it goes back to the first question today about incident response and having a cybersecurity response plan. Exercises are so important when it comes to cybersecurity response. So having a response plan, but also exercising it and practicing it. Because yeah, an incident is great practice, but it's much more fun to run an exercise and practice it that way. This is one of the greatest descriptions I've seen, and I'm taking this forward to all my presentations and exercises and senior exec meetings, is how do you know when an incident happens? So technical alerts from your monitoring infrastructure, reports from your staff, but also third parties such as partners, suppliers, private companies, or the public performing incident investigations and threat research. And I think sometimes there's this unrealistic expectation putting on cybersecurity personnel that they'll just know. They just know, but not understanding the source of where the cybersecurity staff member is finding out. You're getting a technical alert, but you might not know what's going on yet. Your staff might have reported something, but you don't know what's going on yet. And the third parties are reporting something to you, but you don't know the impact on your organisation yet. And that's why I like these three, because it shows that it's not some magical report delivery that cybersecurity staff are getting. There's three components and it takes a lot more investigation and evidence. So that's my presentation in summary. I hope you've got something out of hearing where the policy settings are in New South Wales that are relevant to cybersecurity and smart places. Some insights from this new report, this new principles for connected places out of the UK, and also from Marina, for those that don't know, she's now posted as well the cyber law link there in the chat too. So there's some new resources for you, and I hope that's been useful. I'll hand back to Rory or take any questions now.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. I certainly appreciate on the audience today, there's probably some experts in this space. I'm not one of them. So I'm listening in, and I can see how this could be potentially quite, overwhelming. As you went through there was just so much kind of what I call critical and relevant stuff. What would you kind of say for those that are listening or watching it kind of later? How do we make this? How do we get this approachable? So you started off with you've got this New South Wales cybersecurity policy. You talked about reference to NIST and the National Cybersecurity Centre and there's principles connected places. So there's just a lot, and it feels like we're it's actively developing. But how do we make sure that we are pulling this through and it's approachable for a wide audience? I think that's going to be looking at smart places.
Sorry, it took me a bit of time to take myself on mute for some reason. I think it's become so much more approachable. So I didn't put up on the slides there, but the smart infrastructure policy, a really specific, clear list of things to be done in terms of smart cities. Then in terms of secure by design, really specific list of things that can be done. I've summarised these connected places principles today, but it's really specific. If you look at the privilege section, dot points in plain English, not techno gabble, nothing like that. Really clear on how to put it in place. Now, it does seem like there's a lot of resources, but I think that's a good thing because all of them won't be relevant to your particular smart city. Now, and also if you're not going to be working in a smart city, but you've got lots of Internet of Things devices, some of these documents will be relevant to you, and it depends how big you are. It depends whether you're overseeing a whole governance of a smart city, or whether at your organisation you just want to know more about cybersecurity and start working in it, or make your cybersecurity staff more accountable. So it does seem like a lot, but if you pick up the documents and have a read, they actually give you a clear list of what to do, which I think is very different probably to a few years ago. The New South Wales government policies are all 2 years. The cybersecurity policy was Feb 2019, and the IoT policy and the smart infrastructure policy came after that. And then the UK's national body has only just released those guidelines. So I think, while it might seem overwhelming, there's really great resources there that are really practical. And in saying that as well, the lots of documents that I talked about, the important thing about documents like the smart infrastructure policy and the Internet of Things policy is they're not just security policies. So they're broad policies about how to do the whole thing, but security is part of it. And that's so important because we've been wanting to get security on the agenda. 10 years ago, it was all that was talked about, right? Having these policies that are created with specific security sections and specific privacy sections, it's really important. So it's good they're in their own standalone policies, but also there's heaps of other advice. There was just a question in the chat that I wanted to talk to because it's, I won't say, but Peter, you've asked a question about the cybersecurity policy in local government. We've drafted a version for local government. It was a recommendation out of one of the New South Wales Audit Office reports that local councils also have a cybersecurity policy that they adhere to. So it is in draft form. It's yet to be agreed to, but Cybersecurity New South Wales can keep you in the loop in regards to that. Of course, we'd still encourage you to aim to adhere to those mandatory requirements, not adhere, but constantly mature against those mandatory requirements in the existing policy. But yeah, Cybersecurity New South Wales can keep you up to date.
Okay, great, thanks.
No worries.
So there's a couple other questions. What are you, if you grab those, and then we'll move on to Alana afterwards. I'll leave you to answer those from Biss and Marina.
So Matthias, did I say reuse? What was I referring to when I said reuse? I'm not too sure what I referred to then. That's not twigging for me. I did mention at the start that there's, you can use your existing cybersecurity frameworks as a basis for smart cities, and there are specific things you can add on. It's not creating a new cybersecurity framework. I'm not sure what I talked about with reuse. I can't recall that. So please do type something in the chat and I'll have a look at that later. Oh my goodness, smart cities involving a significant number of vendors. How do you ensure that cyber obligations are flowed down to vendors? You have to put them in the contracts. You do have to put them in contracts, but that's not enough, because the time you realise that they're not adhering to the contract is when the incident happens and it's bad. So that's why I drew out that bit from that connected places principles, which really resonated with me, which was test them. Just like you exercise yourself, put it in the contracts and then test them. Call them up one day and find out what's going on, or, you know, have a bit of a challenge with them, and ensure they're reporting things to you, and what level they're reporting as well. You might have a really clear definition in there about what type of incident they're going to be reporting to you, but yeah, test them. Keeping up with different current emerging laws, regulations and standards is challenging, costly. What is your advice on addressing them in principles and policies? As an organisation, yeah, keeping up with different regulations and standards is costly, but I'd break it down to what do you have to do and what is your organisation's risk appetite. So there's only certain things you actually have to do. To be honest, there's not that many regulations and standards out there. It's what your organisation chooses and prioritises. And that's the most important thing. Don't just follow everything that's released. Have a look at it, take the best out of it, and take it to your decision makers. Take it to the board and say, hey, this is what best practices advise. This is our risk in this regard. This is how much it's going to cost to fix, and put the decision on them and keep promoting what you think is most important.
I might actually, Charlotte, I might ask you to hold there, and we can come back to some of these questions later on in the session. But I just really wanted to thank you for that really thorough review. As I say, I was fully engrossed in the detail that you had there, and yeah, really impressive. But we're going to continue that now, and I'm really pleased to say that we have Dr. Alana Marchut, who's the Professor of Cybersecurity and Behavior at Western Sydney University. She's currently researching on payment diversion fraud and ransomware, tracking money laundering through Bitcoin blenders, distributed extreme edge computing for microcluster satellites, and ethical hacking. She's a cyber ambassador for New South Wales Cybersecurity Network. She's on the board of directors for the cybercrime investigation company IFW Global. She lectures and researches in cybersecurity, privacy, and security by design, cyber risk management, and AI across the disciplines of law, criminology, business, political science, and information communications technology. We are very privileged to have you along, Alana. Thank you so much for taking this time for us. And once again, I'm going to hand over to you and look forward to what you have to say.
Thanks for the introduction, and thanks, Charlotte, for setting such a lovely scene for the points that I'm going to mention in my presentation. First, I start by acknowledging ancestors past and present. I am currently sitting in my office on the War on my land, and I am First Nation Canadian. And if you've been following the news at the moment, it's been a pretty tragic week for First Nations in Canada with the residential schools coming up. And so I always try to mention these things because it's a topic dear to my heart. Now, the next topic dear to my heart, of course, is cybersecurity. So let's start from the beginning. So thank you for the introduction. What I wanted to say today is I'm not actually speaking to you as a representative of Western Sydney University. I'm not speaking to you in a capacity of any one of the following organizations that I work with or for. It's really my own viewpoints, but you need to understand a little bit of my background until you see where I'm coming from, because I'm going to go through things today that you probably haven't heard of before. So I used to be in law. I spent a number of years in law and in fact, working with Osley prior, a lovely little cyber map. And I quickly realized that law was never going to be the answer to cybersecurity. Never, once, ever. It will help with cybersecurity, but is not going to take us on the journey. And so I work in cybercrime investigations where we have embedded informants in some of the world's most notorious hacking groups, connected back to political actors. And that work that we do permeates every ounce of my research at university and will affect the talk today. So I'm going to do something completely different. I'm going to walk you through not compliance, because compliance is okay up to a point. You will not move to cybersecurity maturity until you understand the behavior behind why groups and individuals are in your systems, what they want to do once they're there, and how best to achieve that. And so cybersecurity is one of these strange things where most people think it's technical. There are 11,000 new cybersecurity technical applications that come out every year, and yet cybersecurity is worsening. And why is that? It's because it's so much more than just technology. Now, you'll notice what is missing in these chains here is political science. And that's the one field I have deliberately left out. And the business I've folded in with psychology and law and policy and network security and standards. Cybersecurity is highly political and as such is highly sensitive. And I'll take you through a couple of journeys today, okay? And then you'll begin to understand some of the context. So a few years ago, I got this really strange email and they said, hey, you want to come and train all of the head of security for the parliamentary buildings in Canada and the United States. And if you look carefully, there's a couple of US senators in there. And I thought it was really random, but I thought, okay. So I flew over and the training took place in Parliamentary House in British Columbia, Canada. And I went through anti-terrorism training for a week. And that was with the police, intelligence services, and we went behind the scenes for some of the terror attacks and got to see the footage and what went wrong and what didn't for things that have never made the news. And it was the most eye-opening experience I've probably ever had in terms of training. Now, as part of that, we also I had to learn how to shoot a gun and learn all of the different components going through, and they made us plan a terrorist attack. And so they made us plan the terrorist attack, and then the next day I was to deliver the cybersecurity training. And so what we went and did after that is we planned the same terrorist attack using only cyber methods. And by the end of it, we were able to see it was much easier and cost effective without people dying if you're the terrorists through cyber. And now why is this important? It's important for so many different reasons. So one of the exercises we did afterwards was as followed. I asked the head of security what a typical day looks like in the Parliamentary House. And he said, well, I'm responsible for all the security within that house, but I also have to give tours to delegates from overseas who come to visit. And I said, okay, great, take me on a tour. So he took me on a tour that he normally did. And then at the end, we ended up in his office. And I said to him, so now what happens when they end up in your office? And he says, well, it's a really beautiful thing, Alana. All of these wonderful dignitaries, they often want to show me pictures of their family. And I said, oh, how do they show you pictures on your of their family? He goes, well, sometimes they take out their smartphone, but more often they give me a USB and then I put it into my system. And at this point, I'm just ready to shave my head. Because even if you look in the news last week, you never plug in USB in, ever, that you don't know, that you haven't bought, that you haven't paid at least $75 with. It's 101. So we did an experiment where I dropped 50 of these in airports around the world, and it was really simple. You took it, you plugged it in, and it gave you a note to say why you should never plug a USB in, and then a bunch of cybersecurity information. And then I said, out of courtesy, could you please drop me an email to tell me where you picked it up from and how far it's traveled, and then the next time you're in another airport to drop it back off. These 50 devices previous to COVID have traveled now to 222 different countries. That's how many people have picked up these devices in airports, and they've mostly been left in corporate lounges. And so this is the state of where we're at. If you're just going for compliance, you're not going to get there. So think more than this. Makati is the last city prior to COVID where I dropped one off. Now, thinking like a criminal, it's what you have to do. So what's the safest mobile phone? Dunk, 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 dunk. It's not the Apple. It's the Microsoft phone because no one uses it. Cybersecurity is a business. Perpetrating cybercrime is a business. And it's the third largest economy in Russia. The thing that brings in the most amount of money in their entire nation, third on the list, is cybercrime. We're doing loads of investigations at the moment that link back to terrorist organizations, governments, but mostly it's organized criminal syndicates, all with university backgrounds, all hyper-trained and a hell of a lot more organized than we are. So I'll give you an example of this, okay? At the moment, we're doing an investigation in a country that I won't state, for a reason that we have informants embedded in those countries, and their lives would be at danger. And what is known as is the University of Fraud. Now, at the University of Fraud, there's an organized criminal syndicate group that is training 100 people per week how to do cybercrime and in particular cybersecurity related crimes. 100 people a week. They pay $1,000 US. They exit with software, all the techniques they need to fool people, and all of the ways to commit all sorts of different things. Now, that's just astronomical. Are we producing 100 people a week in government who know their butt from a hole in the ground when it comes to cybersecurity? No, we are not. This is what we're up against. They have a method of rapid turnaround for training people to commit crime. We do not have the same rapid turnaround to do the same. Now, funny, because I feel like we need a little injection of humor. If you actually Google University of Fraud, Trump University is the only one that comes up. Anyways, I thought you'd have a laugh at that. So I'm really grateful for Charlotte, who does really amazing work with the New South Wales government, for mentioning two things. One, supply chain. Two, the right of audit built into a contract. And three, how do you know if you had an incident? I was in a country working with the federal government, and they were giving out cybersecurity awards. And one of the agencies got an award, and a bunch of people started laughing. And so afterwards, after a few drinks, I said, why was that so funny? And they said the reason why they won the award is because they never checked their logs. So the reason why they had no incidences is because nobody had ever checked to see if they had an incident. And so that's just some of the rationale that comes with compliance. So they were only had to comply and do data breach notification if they knew they had a data breach. If you're not checking your logs and you don't have automated systems to do that, you don't have to notify. Therefore, you win the cybersecurity award and you're compliant all at the same time. Laws, while a good stepping stone, are not the answer. And that's the reason why I left law 7 years ago, is because in order to make actual change to cybersecurity, I needed to be doing it from a different discipline. Why is cyber supply chain important? Because it's the easiest way into a system. Think like a criminal. You're not going to try and hack into the defense database. That's stupid. You're not even going to try and hack into New South Wales Transport. They have mature cybersecurity. You're always going to go through the weakest link. And there are two weakest links, the human and the supply chain. You target the human in the supply chain, and you're likely to get through the door. Supply chain is about so much more than finance, logistics, smart tech, and other. It's about every service who engages with your supply in a smart city. Even your cleaners, and this might sound funny, but some sensors get cleaned, are part of your chain. And so the easiest way to get this going in a meaningful way is exactly what Charlotte said. It's built into every contract you do, whether you're in government or private industry. You have to show before you start that you're compliant with the ASD8. I mean, that's just an automatic, that you have the right to audit and then you exercise that. So Charlotte mentioned the possibilities of, state actors being in your system, maybe for R&D, maybe to perpetrate critical infrastructure. It could be motivated by a number of things, but in my 15 years of experience of investigating and working with industry on a daily basis, the vast majority of what we see is motivated by money, because there is so much money that you can make. We often joke that if we were to quit being honest people, we could probably make, we've estimated, about $300 million US in a year with what we know now on how to do this. And so that's what you're up against. The two most common types of cyber attacks that you're going to experience, especially particularly if you're with government or a council and connected to critical infrastructure, it's the standard that you're going to experience if you're in any business. ransomware, payment diversion fraud. Now, thankfully, in Australia, when councils will be hit with ransomware, but not in the same ways they were in the US. Okay, so Baltimore is a city that come up, and that's because critical infrastructure is connected differently in the US as it is to in terms of who has the data custodians and who is responsible for what services. A lot of the cities in the United States are the ones that have control over all of the connectedness with critical infrastructure. And so they become a much more high value target. That's not necessarily the case within Australia. It's more government agencies and private corporations. Nonetheless, it's still there. So what is payment diversion fraud? You may have already heard about business email compromise. It's the same thing, right? So someone pretends to be a supplier in your chain, and they will send you some sort of a notification, often through email, but it could be through social media. It could be through increasingly a text on your phone. And what they're trying to make you do is to pay fraudulent, as a fraudulent supplier. The thing that gets my irk so much is we have all this training in phishing, and they make it look like phishing is something that you can spot because there'll be a letter out or the spelling will be bad. Yeah, that was phishing 10 years ago. Phishing for payment diversion fraud now, it will copy whole trains of prior discussion and email that you've had with that supply chain. It is sophisticated as hell. The only way you're going to be able to tell that this is happening is through accounting controls, not security controls. And so while the security controls are important, there's so many other controls that go into cybersecurity as well. We looked at, so I've helped to investigate a couple of payment diversion frauds, and more importantly, we've done quite a bit of research within New South Wales organizations to learn more about how companies are being hit by payment diversion fraud. So this is an example of an accounting firm whose annual turnover is $2 million, therefore not subject to privacy law within Australia, because as you know, a small business is $3 million and under. Would be subject now to the financial obligations in APRA. But look, the reality is when you're hit with one of these things, who cares if you're compliant? What you need to do is try to recover your money if you can, and sometimes you can. I can't stress this enough, sometimes you can, right? But more importantly than not, you want to set yourself up afterwards and so that it doesn't happen again. In my experience, I haven't worked or seen more than one organization that has put in all of the recommended security tools afterwards to prevent it from happening again. And so it just isn't something we do, and I don't know why. What we learned through this, and this is a more sophisticated one, this is one that we looked at where it was timed with a calendar that was put online. And so they knew when the CEO was going to be at a conference and what flight that they were on. And there was a targeted message that went out from his iPhone about a merger and acquisition that was happening. And there needed to be this immediate payout of $2.1 million in order for that merger to go through. And it was timed so that he would have had his airplane mode off with his phone when he went in. It looked like it was coming from his phone. It was from his phone. There was a vulnerability inserted within. So, and they went for a $2.2 million payment diversion. Okay, so whether or not you're government or industry, this is still as relevant to you as not. And where this is becoming increasingly bizarre is the following has happened during COVID. Ransomware, which I'm going to get into now, okay, is moving from company to person. And so what we're seeing happening literally in the last 3 to 4 weeks is the following. A company or a government entity will be hit with a ransom. They'll come in, their systems won't work, they can't access their data. Now, if you have your data stored in multiple spots and you have a cyber incident plan that is dedicated and has really built-in ransomware functions, you'd probably be okay. But I can promise you it's one of the most stressful days of your life if this comes in now. Because it'll be stressful to you if you're with a government entity or other suffering ransomware, because suddenly you have to figure out how to play in Bitcoin. You have to, pay, X amount of money. Typically a ransomware would run between about $50,000 and $5 million. But what we've seen recently is people in high up positions, while they're in their systems, they go and they have a look because they're working from home and they don't have the same security. And then they're holding personal photos of their grandkids and other things they find on there in additional ransom. So it's a business ransom and it's a personal ransom. And that's hugely on the rise right now. And so that's coming in one after the other. It's not being reported in the media, but most of the industry companies that I deal with are dealing with 20 ransomware cases a week at the moment each. It's just spreading like wildfire in Australia. So I don't know why we don't have an emergency ransomware program happening right now, because it's just a matter of time for most people. So we did some research on ransomware where we interviewed 30 seriously senior to mid-level management. Most of them were CTOs and CISOs, so people that ought to know in government and industry, and none of them small companies, by the way, what their state of awareness was with ransomware. And they were only able to identify rudimentary components of ransomware, a very rudimentary understanding of how it happens. And we were not expecting to find that result. We were expecting CISOs and CTOs to be far more knowledgeable around ransomware, and they were not. And this study was carried out between 2019 and 2020. And it's made us refocus our research, what we found there. So Charlotte's mentioned the standards, the codes, and the certifications. You can look at every single law there is. It's far more important today that you not go and look at those laws, that you leave today, you look at NIST, you look at the ASD Essential 8, you check which ones you're doing, and if you're not doing all of them, you put into a plan on implementing just one for now. I'll take it, just one of these things. And one of the most important things to do is multi-factor authentication. Solar winds, pipelines in America, all infiltrated through USBs and shitty passwords. 1, 2, 3, multi-factor authentication. Now, I don't want to be a scaremonger because there's some beautiful things happening in Australia. We have an I-code that is working. And the most important thing is that Australian companies have cyber insurance. It's a message that's gone out. It has been received, and it's one of the most profitable areas for insurance companies at the moment is cyber insurance. So switch back, okay? And what we also find is that small business is probably the ones least likely to have cyber insurance, and they're going to be supplying to you. Doesn't matter where you're working. 80% of Australian businesses are small. These are who's going to be in your supply chain. So we did an experiment over COVID with our students where we took all of the security controls that we thought would be relevant to small business. We looked at the ASD Essential 8, CREST, and then the NIST. And then we mapped all of them in terms of how they corresponded and which framework did what. And as you can see here, if you were just to look at NIST, you wouldn't be in compliance with some of the ASD Essential 8. And if you were just to look at the ASD Essential 8, you would miss some of the ones on CREST and NIST. And why is this important? Well, we then went and interviewed a bunch of small businesses where we asked them, could you explain cybersecurity? And, you know, there were about 15 organizations that could explain a couple of components. Some that could not, but most, you know, like actually had zero concept what cybersecurity was. And then we asked them if they could name any security controls. And we only had one organization that could name 3 or more, and the rest couldn't. So they couldn't name something like backups, multi-point authentication, cyber incident response plan, like none of the basic things that we think all these businesses are doing, they're ground zero. And then it gets worse. If you ask if they've implemented any of this, there was only one organization. It was the same one that knew the 3 security controls. And the reason why they'd implemented is because they were dealing with US citizens' medical data. And for those of you who love regulations and law, that's a nice story. HIPAA has been instrumental in changing medical cybersecurity practices in the US and globally. So what did we learn? Well, here's one of the things we learned. We then went and took all of the training materials that governments have spent a fortune on to develop, and we gave those training materials, and we took the best ones on the most simple security controls known to man. We gave them to our sample companies, and we observed whether or not they could implement a single security control based on the training materials that government and businesses provided. And the answer to that question was failingly no. The training materials that we have devised are not designed for small business. They're not designed for not-for-profit. They're not designed for people as an individual level, and we have to get better at doing this, okay? So then we asked the most important thing. Behavioral economics is the key to unraveling cybersecurity, not law. We asked them, what would it take for them to hire someone to come in and update their systems, right? To move from Microsoft XP, which gets zero support and zero patching, into a more secure system. The median answer was that they would only spend $200. And even if then, they weren't even sure if they would do it, okay? And so that's where things are at. So what we thought was that we looked over quite a bit of the data with our industry partners, and we noticed that 90% of the examined payment diversion frauds, now we had a low sample size, but they all could have prevented through better accounting controls and configuration of Office 365. So, you know, like that's just something you write into your contract. Do you use ask them, is your email system supported? And you give instructions. If you're using Office 365, which most businesses are, is it configured the proper way? Like, these are the things that organizations still don't know how to do. It's not quantum computing. They don't know how to do the basics, all right? They didn't understand how mediums and vectors in cybercrime change. I mean, I infiltrate, work with companies to infiltrate. We work with the FBI and Europol almost on a weekly basis. They change. They're so much smarter than us. They change how they do things and their tactics in order to maximize profits, okay? And the craziest thing is that we even went into the ASD portal. Because what happens is the following. When you get hit, if you're a government organization, you have different protocols and components going forward, right? But typically what happens is the following. If you get hit with something, you immediately call your IT people, right? So whether or not they're hitting your sensors in an open data portal network, or you're being hit with ransomware or payment diversion fraud or something else, you talk to IT or you phone your legal department. Oh, nothing craps me more than when they phone their legal department first, the team the least likely to actually know what to do. You're far better off phoning your cyber insurance provider because they'll connect you instantly with a reputable company to help you. But within government, you actually have the support of ASD and the cyber operations within the cybersecurity cert. If you are not a government entity, you get directed to a reporting portal, and it looks like this. Okay, what am I? One of these things I click. And so we clicked on small business. And then here's one of the problems. We clicked. And then it was like, okay, here's the ransomware. Okay, great. I'm getting there. I'm going to go click on the ransomware page. And it's just a basic generic sheet of information, utterly useless for someone experiencing ransomware, where they see their business going up in flames before their eyes. And so I'm interested in solutions. Laws and regulations are great. Policies and strategies are good, but we have to get to the nuts and bolts. And so we're really thankful to the federal government for backing us and giving us money. There are thousands of free legal aid clinics run by universities around the world, and it's almost standard practice. September, we're opening up the first cyber incident management response training center for small business. And that's happening right now. That space is being kitted out like that. We've already taken 2 live incidences, both from councils, even though we're not up and running, because that's how acute the need is. And the government portals and entities don't help these people on these organizations. Today, we're partnered with most of the following entities here. I had to brag it. We don't have a partnership yet with McAfee, but that list is changing every day of companies that are helping us with this cyber incident response training center. All of our students will be manning and going through for training. And most important of all, we're going to start to do the research that needs to be done, and it's around behavioral change. We know the research will tell us that phishing awareness actually doesn't train, and it doesn't implement the kind of change that we need to see within organizations. So what does? Anybody recognize these two people? My first week in Australia, I went to Bondi Beach, and that's what I saw. And I had no idea this was Sacha Baron Cohen. And I was absolutely gobsmacked because I thought, oh my goodness, where have I moved to that this is appropriate to wear on a beach? And it was only afterwards that I realized he was filming, you know, his famous movie. But on the right is his brother, Simon Baron Cohen, who is a professor of psychology at University of Cambridge. And he really pioneered with a number of other people, including some comedians, behavioral change research in cybersecurity. And so one of the first things they did, this was a long time ago, is they stood at a metro in London and they handed out Mars bars if you gave them your username and password. And you couldn't believe how empty those Mars bar boxes were after 5 minutes. And so they then went and followed up to see if actually the usernames and passwords were for legit, and they were. Now, granted, this was a long time ago, but it just made me think, what do we have to do now to get people to wake up and make the small basic changes that they need to do to kick the organized criminals out of our systems? Like, what is it that we need to make that change? So I think back to some of the experiments. Now, I'm very lucky, and my brother worked at Amazon, and now he's gone to work with the American, I'm Canadian, but he lives in the US. And he gets access to all of the psychology experiments that have been done within America in his new role, and he sends them over to me. And I find this one is the most interesting. Does anyone know what this famous experiment was in the 60s and 70s? It's called Drunk Tank Pink. So what they discovered in a series of research is that this particular color of pink has a weird calming effect on people when they're drunk. And so drunk tanks, right, when they would round up all the locals that had been into a brawl on the weekend causing mischief, locking them up until they sobered up, et cetera, they noticed that had a really overwhelming reduction of violence when they painted the cells pink. And so drunk tank pink occurred across America with people painting all of the cells pink. And for me, I want to get to the point where I know what drunk tank pink is in cyber for different groups within Australia and globally. Okay, so I'm thinking about this. And so if I had to impart with one thing today, I was very lucky in 2017 to work with the Information and Privacy Commissioner of New South Wales. And we did a research report on the conditions enabling open data and promoting a data sharing culture. Now, at the time, I had a very opinionated viewpoint of open data, and it was the following. Open data brings more advantages than it does detrimental aspects. Like, I don't think that there should be a city in the world that doesn't start to move to smart, right? And I say that unequivocally. But if your move to smart is one where you're merely putting data up onto Excel spreadsheets, it's not enough, okay? The portals that you're being asked to develop are going to be the transformational components that move us into combating climate change, move us into more urbanized and beautiful cities to live in. They're going to reduce problems, violence. It's amazing how much data can be, along with insights, can be gleaned with effective policies and procedures and components going forward. Now, my viewpoint is that opening your data with a smart city does indeed open up some privacy and cybersecurity challenges, but there are many ways of combating those challenges. And if there's one thing I've learned in open data, is that the more things are open, the more easy it is to spot the problems, because an algorithm can start to do it for you better, okay? I'll leave on one note. If you want to access that report, we analyzed the best countries in the world and how they transitioned into open data in a private and secure way. It's there. And I'll leave you with asking yourself, what's the one security control you're going to bring to your organization tomorrow? And what's the one security control you're going to bring to your household tomorrow? These are hard things to do, and it's none of it fun, But if we don't start to do it, it's just going to get uglier and uglier for us. That's pretty much the end of my spiel. Thank you for listening. As you can see, I'm very passionate about cybersecurity and changing things for us.
Alana, thank you so much for that session. I hope that someone sent me a message that it was going on. They just said that you're a rock star, and they haven't laughed out loud in any masterclass until that session, although it was both a laugh and a very scared and serious topic. So thank you so much. I want to echo that was excellent insight. So now for everybody who's on, we've come to that point in time actually where we've got open questions and answers, hopefully, with Alana and Charlotte. And so I do want to encourage you, if you have a question, you're challenged by some of the things that were said, or you'd like to know more, then please get those questions into the chat. And so we can get going. It's not often that we have such wonderful leaders in this space, so please don't miss your opportunity. I would actually like to kick it off by going back to sort of one of these sort of key themes around the supply chain and thinking about the importance of the supply chain and wanting to understand. My assumption for what I'm hearing is if there's one weakness in the supply chain, then there's potential weakness for everything. But given the connectedness of the supply chain, given the connectedness of smart cities, thinking about both a local and state government perspective and the interactions you need there, does that mean that we need to, move really strongly to like a base consistent level for everybody? Across that supply chain, everyone who's interacting, because from what I'm hearing is that at that moment, if you're taking that place-based cybersecurity approach, you actually sort of the laws don't facilitate that to do so.
Yeah, look, there's some interesting questions there. The reality is with basic security controls, you can keep out 80%, probably about 80% of cyber criminals. If you're in critical infrastructure like a bank, right, you would expect them to have the highest levels of cybersecurity maturity along with defense and companies connected to cybersecurity infrastructure. Now, I don't think an SME is going to compromise a bank, but I've seen it compromise defense on more than one occasion. And so I will leave that with you. And so often what we see is that the compromise may start in the supply chain and then it works its way up slowly. And so there's just no way of getting around it. What I can say, though, is that there are companies that specialize in doing assessments around supply chain, and they will give you a resilience score. And they do that through mapping a whole range of different data sets, and then it spits out in real time. And two of the world's leading companies in that space are actually Australian based. And so it would be great if we started to have these companies involved much more with helping us with our supply chain. And the name of those two companies is escaping me, but one of them moved to Silicon Valley after they got venture capital. And then the other one is actually based in New South Wales. And they have some fantastic products that will give you a score on how to assess that.
Great, thank you. And Charlotte, do you have anything that you want to add on the supply chain piece?
I guess it's both related to supply chain and your own architecture. But I guess the one thing I'd add is that you can put all the protections in place, as Alana has said, and they will still try and find a way in, but know your supply chain and your architecture better than the threat actor, so that at least when something happens, you know where they might move to next once they work out where to go. That's one thing you can try and do, and I think that sometimes what people don't understand is what's connected to what within their organisation.
Yeah. So one of the things we're going to do with the incident response center is we've had a couple of large companies contact us And we're going to be able to put the incident management into their very sophisticated AI systems, and they'll be able to spit back where they think it's going to move next. And so at the moment we don't have a very good mechanism of advising companies that are likely to be hit, but a lot of it's predictable because it usually starts with one sector at a time. And at the moment, the medical sector is being hit the hardest in Australia. Not in the news.
No, not in the news. All right, I want to encourage everybody again, don't miss out on this opportunity to put your question forward for Alana and Charlotte. There is Marina did post a question at the beginning, but I'll just read this out. Alana, you personify the attacker as a person. How about attacks perpetrated by AI or machines gone rogue?
All attacks are perpetrated by AI, but there's a person and an organization behind it. So attacks are automated. They've been automated for a decade. You don't even have to be the person that knows how to do it. You just buy the kit. It's a bit like buying Office 365. You buy the kit, and then you press play and hit go. And so the training usually is on the software. So they sell the cybercrime kits on how to do ransomware, or you can hire someone to do it for you as a service, and that's the money. So the one thing I didn't mention is I've been doing about a decade's research worth of dark market analysis, and I fly to a secret facility to mine that data. I haven't been there because of COVID in a bit, but it's just interesting to see how that underworld works with how they sell things with their services and other. It's, you know, so yes, it's all automated. But the reality is the people that set it up tend to be people who've studied marketing and business, right? It's business, $1 trillion business. There are whole small countries where it's how the government makes their money. They're heavily involved in cybercrime. It's so out of control, you don't even know where to start. And so you start by the one thing you can control. Try and make I use the analogy of your house. Try and make sure your house has windows that close and lock. Try and make sure that you have a gate. Do the basics to deter the person from coming into your system. Now, if they're heading for state espionage, they're going to go after the higher elements or the CEOs. And then you're going to be dealing with something that's so sophisticated. I had a student who took over a cybersecurity wing of a large company, and he said, "You've got to meet my new girlfriend." And we went out for a drink, and I was sitting there, and I didn't know what to say, because let me just put that he is not an attractive man, and his girlfriend was a 10 out of 10. And I thought, oh, she's probably a spy. And so I joked with him afterwards. And a month later, he contacts me telling him ASIO told him she was a spy. So that's what you're dealing with if you're actually senior in cybersecurity for some of these. Like, and I don't know if they even get trained at the moment. Like that's a true story. I can have that person at some point maybe come and share that with you. But this is the state of where we're at, especially if you're sitting on crown jewels like Charlotte described.
Right. On that note, let me move on to the next question. This is from Sandy. I might get Charlotte to kick this off. She wants to know what are your perspectives on what local government should do as first steps, given they typically do not have resources or capability in this area?
No problems. Thanks for your question, Sandy. I recognise your name, so I assume you are linked in with our local councils forum. I keep saying our, even though I'm not on Cybersecurity New South Wales at the moment. I'm in a different role. But in terms of resources, you can contact Cybersecurity New South Wales for training, awareness materials, templates for ISMSs, templates for incident response plans. Cybersecurity New South Wales can also run exercises for you. So in terms of the resources for that, they can write them for you and run them for you. Discussion exercises are not functional exercises, but discussion exercises, particularly with your executive, to prepare for an attack, they can do that. All you need to do is get them in a room and show up, and the team can do the rest. So in terms of that, that's what Cybersecurity New South Wales is there for, to do those things that can be done efficiently and at scale. So everybody's not recreating their own exercise materials, training materials. I'd also say that the other thing is, don't try and do everything. If you've got to prioritize some specific things, Alana mentioned it before, if you've got to prioritize one specific thing that you need to put in place in terms of technical controls, I'd say multi-factor authentication, which is one Alana mentioned before, and I'd also mention patching, because in terms of the things that get reported to Cybersecurity New South Wales, it's things that have been prevented by patching and multi-factor authentication, and that would get the majority of them not happening. There is that people component as well, but if you have multi-factor authentication in place, you don't care if somebody's giving away their password. They shouldn't be, but you don't care if somebody's giving away their password if multi-factor authentication is in place.
My students are working on a tool right now because, believe it or not, it's hard to know if you're patching. Like, you think that's an easy problem. It's actually not. We've gone through 100 different versions of different browsers, email servers, etc., to see how automated it is, and if the automation only happens as a result of a mandatory first click, and what versions of that software with icons are no longer supported, meaning that you might think you have that all in place because you have a product from from Gmail or Microsoft, and then it isn't. And so we're developing an app for that, so you can go and test, and then that should be a wake-up call of go and spend $300 on something that patches automatically.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, wouldn't mind coming back to that point about costs. So I think it was interesting in the reference point you put in that companies wouldn't be willing to spend, or the average was $200, and for some, they weren't even interested in spending it. But there's probably two questions here. What's the question number one for you is like, what's the kind of burning platform? What needs to happen for people to really get the criticality of it and understand that they need to spend money? And then I think there's a separate question to that, which is when we're thinking about what we actually need to spend, do we not need to start thinking about fundamental sort of commercial models and procurement and so forth? And how do we have that cybersecurity component actually embedded? And is it, maybe this is the third question, is this a spend challenge? Because I've heard a lot about some, sort of core things we do. I've heard a lot about sort of on the behavior piece. It's not necessarily, Alana, you're talking about, it's not necessarily just having the policy pieces. So interested in your thoughts across those three parts.
Well, New South Wales is they've got a new skills program where you can apply for grants to get your employees coming to get upskilled in cybersecurity. I think it's New South Wales government. I just got an email today on it. And so there's all sorts of opportunities to send your employees on upskilling around a range of components. And so those avenues are there. It's just whether or not people know that they're there. That's kind of a separate issue. And so those programs are starting. And the federal government's rolled out the new skills innovation programs. And I don't think we have the results yet of who's won that. But there's been a number of companies that have partnered together to apply for those types of grants in order to upskill a whole range of actors. For me, probably the most interesting group to upskill, which we currently don't do, are people who program. So if someone puts security by design, yeah, that's important. So is privacy by design. But if you look at the vast majority of software engineers, none of them had any training on how to code securely. And so it's a real gaping hole with almost every program in Australia that relies on a software engineer. They actually don't know how to secure with code. And if you go to, we went to Usenex, which is the best conference in the world on cybersecurity because companies present the best research along with universities, and that's where Google and Facebook hires. You wear a tag if you're for sale, you want to be hired. And they said unequivocally the hardest thing for them to recruit are people that know how to code securely. It's not easy. And so we almost have zero focus on it in Australia. I think it's a gaping hole with what we do here.
And Charlotte, what would you add on those points?
I'll just add, Alana's covered that beautifully. I'll just add that the burning platform's burnt. There's no platform. Like the platform has burnt so many times that I don't think that's what we're waiting for anymore. And I don't think we're waiting for that either. I think it is just generally that in organisations, resource decisions are made every day, and whether that's prioritising cybersecurity or not. I don't think that's to do with there not being a burning platform for cybersecurity. It's just what are they weighing up on the day? And often it's versus IT spend, right? So what Alana's saying about programmers securely coding, those programmers part of IT spend, that's you're hiring programmers like that from the start.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different integrated aspects that can be done that
Yes.
allow for that IT spend to also be going towards cybersecurity, because you're not fixing at the end, you're preventing at the start.
Yeah.
Rory, I think you're on mute.
I thought I was going to get away with it no, still didn't. Thank you, Charlotte. I think there's one more question coming in, maybe from Sandy. I saw the magic little dots, but they just went away. Look, there's a small crew here, so I do again really want to encourage you. If you're listening in here, you've got a question. Actually, please feel free to maybe just put your hand up or put your video on and ask the question at this opportunity, or I will monopolize, which is not good for anybody.
Definitely reach out to New South Wales Cybersecurity. You know, they're there for a reason. And what I didn't mention is that we've got I only mentioned 3 research programs that we have in a number. We've discovered almost accidentally, much to our surprise, that government agencies actually have much more secure cybersecurity posture than some of the largest corporations based on some of our preliminary research. And so they have the resources, they're developing these things, go and access them. They're there for you.
Yeah, great. So look, I think I can see Peter might be typing a question as well. Let's go back to that cost question. I think I recall that there used to be this concept of a standard, when you're costing out a program, you should allocate sort of 5% for cyber. Is that should we be still thinking about that way, or is it really just going back to the risks? That's just an old school approach.
Well, actually, cyber risk management has become much more evolved over the last 5 years, and so it's done much more scientifically than 5%. If you ask me where cybersecurity needs to be taught the most in Australia, it's in business schools. So my new center is located in the business school in the PwC building, in order to educate every MBA student coming out, because they're actually the ones that would be making all the decisions about the costing. So if you're in critical infrastructure, obviously, like harm can come as a result of someone breaking into your system, where people could be at risk and dying. Same with the hospitals. Your budget should be significantly higher than 5%, because you have duty of care not only around the data, but around the people that use and rely on your services and infrastructure. That, of course, will be significantly less for other organizations, depending on what they want to secure. Medical data at the moment in Australia hasn't been elevated to that higher level of cybersecurity compliance and guidelines like it has in the US. Our financial data has, but our medical hasn't yet. And that's probably a piece that needs to start to happen soonest. And you know what? It will happen, because hospitals are being hit one after the other. And I can tell you right now, there's one hospital in Australia that had to shut down all of its surgeries in the last week.
Wow. Okay. So look, there was one question here. Does New South Wales Cybersecurity have a mailing list? That's in the chat, and I think Charlotte, I'm guessing that you are.
I'm typing.
Yeah, and so does AusCyber and the New South Wales Innovation Node. It's all connected.
All right, fantastic. Well, look, whilst Charlotte's just typing and adding to the chat, what I might do is maybe just ask for some closing perspective or remarks from both of you, and we can bring this session to an end. Alana, maybe you want to kick off first, and then I'll hand to Charlotte afterwards.
I don't know, we've covered so many points today. Just pick one and implement it, please. I'm not asking you to change the world, just pick one. And we only talked briefly about a cyber incident response plan. The city of Baltimore would have been in much better shape if they had done the following. They had a cyber incident response plan, but forgot that when all your systems go down, you don't have access to the system to check what your cyber incident response plan is. You have to have a paper copy, and it should be sitting on everyone's desk. So that's a 101 lesson that it was just something you would have just not even thought about. But these kind of things need to be printed out on paper, because when you get hit, you might not have access to any of your systems. And also, the cloud is more secure. Don't think that you can control things better than the cloud has. With dedicated resources in cyber, move your data to the cloud.
Great. Charlotte?
I'll actually follow on from Alana. Exercises are fun. They are my passion, and when you're doing exercises, if you're not in cybersecurity, talking to cybersecurity people, practice everything. Practice the extreme risks. Practice going dark, as Alana said, and make sure people don't realize that's a test. And I think that's with everything. Lana touched on phishing education. The more important thing other than phishing education is getting people to report stuff. If you've got a workforce that is reporting things that they see that don't look right, that's much more important than whether they've clicked on something or done something or downloaded something they shouldn't have. If you're encouraging a culture of reporting when their system starts going glitchy or something weird happens, then that is the best news. So reporting and encouraging people to understand that when they're practicing something in cybersecurity, it's not a test. That's the whole reason of practicing. The real test comes when there's an incident and you haven't practiced.
Yeah, I mean, government's different, but for our organization, we don't accept email. It's too prone to risk. And if you're a small organization and you can move away from generic email, move to Proton Mail. It blocks 98% of all phishing attacks. It's amazing. Proton Mail. Move to it if you're able to. It blocks out so many of the security nasties.
Oh, I love that. And the cyber fitness, and of course it makes sense. I mean, you can't get good at anything or be prepared unless you practiced, and that applies to all. All right. Well, look. Let me just do some closing points. These are really some practical bits. I believe that Mark will be adding the presentation slides at some point. Mark, do let me know. There we go, straight in. And you've got those links. Recording of this evening's session was going to be made available in a few days on the Australian Computer Society's technical YouTube channel. I'm looking forward to having that next. I'll certainly be sharing it out widely. I want to call out that this was Masterclass number 8. There are 2 more Masterclasses at the moment scheduled. Next week, there's going to be a focus on IoT for smart places with Frank Zeichner, Pascal Perez, and Kim Yan. And then the week after that, we've got Investing in Smart Places with Michael Komenos, Jason D'Souza, and Meredith Hodgman. That's all going to be leading up to the New South Wales Smart Places Summit on the 22nd of June. We just sent a communication out about that this week. And if you haven't responded, please do so and make sure that you get your reservation for that event. Finally, I just would like to give another big thanks to you, Alana, to you, Charlotte, for taking your time this afternoon. Thank you for presenting such sort of comprehensive insights and really taking us on that sort of complete journey regarding cybersecurity and smart places, calling out some of those critical challenges, as well as just that real encouragement to us to start to take appropriate steps if we haven't done so. And I say, as I do appreciate the time that you've given us this. So once again, thank you. And with that, I'm going to call a close to this masterclass. I appreciate the audience for those that have been able to stay through to the end. And but I'm glad to be able to also just give you back 10 minutes of the day. With that, thank you.
Thanks, Rory and Mark, for organizing and for everyone from attending. Have a good night.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Good.